Hello chess fans, the chess community has been hit once again by another huge, massive cheating scandal. In my last video I already talked about the huge incident which happened at the Spanish Team Championships, in which a super grandmaster had been expelled from the tournament after a phone was found in the toilet, and the organizers and arbiter, they linked that phone to Kirill Shevchenko, the strong grandmaster originally from Ukraine, nowadays representing Romania. Is a really strong player. He is 2656 rated, number 69 in the world. So if he is really found guilty, it's probably one of the biggest scandals in chess ever. Probably the strongest player who has ever been caught cheating in over the board play. Now, in this video, I would like to elaborate more on this story, as we are going to have a look at a game he played in round 2 against the Spanish top grandmaster Francisco Vallejo Pons. And during this game, Vallejo Pons, he felt the behavior of his opponent to be very suspicious, as he was walking a lot away from the board, probably visiting the toilet as well. And he called the help from the arbiters, and eventually the arbiters, they found that phone in the toilet and linked it to Kirill Shevchenko. Now, I don't want to be the judge, let it be clear. I'm here just to analyze the game, give my personal ideas on what really happened, and if this game can be used as evidence whether Shevchenko cheated or not. So let's dive straight into the action. A lot of interesting things are happening, even if you feel like he's a cheater or not. Just look at the game from interesting chess perspective, as I believe at least you can learn something from it. So if you do like this video and my channel, make sure to subscribe, and then you will be up to date on the latest developments also regarding this story. So here we go. Shevchenko is playing with the white pieces, goes for e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6. It's the Petrov defense. And now after knight takes e5, the main move here is to kick the knight first with the move d6. After the knight goes away, then you take on e4. However, knight takes e4 is also possible, but for a long time this move was considered to be really bad, as white can play here the move queen e2, attacking the knight. If the knight goes anywhere, let's say back to f6, there is knight c6 with discovered check, and you're winning the queen. This is a very famous trap. However, with the latest equipment, this move, knight takes c4, has been made playable again, as black can counter it with queen e7, remaining symmetry on the board. But after queen takes e4, the knight is defended, so black got to kick the knight away here first with the move d6, but in fact the knight cannot move, because if it moves, then the queen on e4 is hanging. So instead of being a piece up, white says, okay, I'm gonna protect the knight with the pawn, and after taking on e5, white is in fact a pawn up, but black is intending to regain it by bringing out the knight to c6. Black is hitting the pawn on e5. Now, this is modern opening theory, has been seen in quite a number of games, and it's not that easy to stick to the pawn on e5. Now, if you go for a move like f4, probably bishop g4 is a good move, with ideas to castle queenside very shortly after, and well, black is slightly up in development. There's also one very cool trap which was not played in the game. It's the move bishop f4, but in that case you can go g5, attacking the bishop. If the bishop goes back to g3, it's a huge mistake, as it runs into the move f5. Very cool idea to attack the queen, and you cannot take en passant, as the queen on e4 is hanging once again. If you go back with the queen to e2, for instance, then it's f4 and the bishop is trapped. Strong grandmasters have fallen into this opening trap. Anyway, it seemed like white knew what he was doing. So instead of protecting the pawn, Shevchenko played here the move knight c3, queen takes e5. Queens are coming off the board. The bishop comes to f4, hitting the knight. If knight goes away, pawn on c7 will be hanging. Bishop d6. And here you can see that black has ideas, either to give a check on f3 or d3, and then sacrifice the knight so that you can take the bishop on f4. Therefore, bishop g3 is played. The bishop is now perfectly protected. These discovered checks with the knight, they no longer work. Black goes for the move h5, intending to go h4. But here, white castles queenside, good move. And if you do play h4 now, it runs into bishop takes knight. And after that, there is this very unpleasant pin, which will lead to the loss of material for black. Because if you support the bishop, it's the move f4. The bishop can't leave the e file because of that pin. Therefore, instead of pushing the h-pawn, first, the knight needs to be supported with f6. Knight goes to b5, undermining the blockade of black in the center. And now the move h4. I think this is actually a very interesting moment, as if I would be playing here white, and this has still been seen in a number of games, I would definitely take the bishop immediately. In the game, there followed this move bishop f4, but here again, that bishop is now unprotected. And with the move knight d3, which was not played in the game, it seems to me that black is doing okay. If he recaptures on f4, king goes away, and something like g5. It's a difficult line, but you can try to hide with your king here, get a bishop out at some point, connect the rooks. Looks like black is close to equality, but probably black believed that this is quite a tricky position. If white is very fast with rook he1, well, I understand that that move knight e3 was not played, but it's probably the real equalizer in this position for black. But black instead played king e7. But now it's knight takes d6, pawn takes d6, and white has the bishop pair and a slightly better pawn structure because of that pawn island on d6. But black is very solid. He can get the bishop out, connect the rooks. How is white going to break through here? Well, white came up with a novelty, interesting move, bishop d2, as the bishop has done its job on f4 and is now rerouted to a better square from where it can hit the pawn on d6. Bishop to g4 played, attacking the rook. Pawn to f3, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes back to f5. And here it is, bishop to b4, attacking that weakness on d6. And black defends it with the move rook h d8. And here it's time for white to complete development. Bishop comes out to e2. The rooks are connected. But it's black who creates a threat here by playing rook a c8, attacking the pawn on c2. And now, okay, Shevchenko played quite a nice move, as he played here the move c3. And it takes away the threat of the pawn hanging on c2. But still, it does feel a little bit shaky, opening up that diagonal towards the white king. But, well, it's not easy for black to make use of it. Well, there followed the move, king to f7. And to be honest, I felt this was quite a remarkable decision. But it's very understandable, because looking at the position from black's perspective, you don't really want to face the move rook h e1, so that after that you can play the move f4, challenge that knight on e5, and with the rook on the e file opposing the king, there are potentially quite some huge problems for black. So that explains why Vallejo Pons played here the move king f7, and he said that, okay, please take my pawn on d6. I can go knight c4, attacking the bishop. And what you would like to get here as black is a position with opposite colored bishops, so that if you do take the knight, you can take back with the rook. And with opposite colored bishops, well, there is usually quite a high drawing tendency in these positions. So white kept the bishop, the dark squared bishop, on the board, guarding the e3 square, preventing the knight from jumping in. Rook e8, attacking the bishop. Rook h e1, defending the bishop. And here it is the move g5, attacking the bishop once again. And well, you don't really have a good square for the bishop to go to. I mean, you can go to a square for sure. Let's say you can go back to d2. But look at white's pieces. They're quite passive. Even black can consider a move like b5. Maybe there are attacking chances. But definitely there is compensation for the pawn. But here, Shevchenko decided to trade off the bishop for the knight, giving up the bishop pair. Rook takes e4, rook takes e8, king takes e8. And, well, bishop is still hanging, so bishop goes to e3 to hit the pawn on a7. And, well, black has to think of what's coming next. Here, they follow the move a6 to defend, prevent white from capturing that pawn. But after rook d6, all of a sudden, there are some issues regarding that pawn on f6. Even the bishop can come to d4. So black is kind of forced here to play the move rook c6, but that was conscious decision by black. Rooks were exchanged. So here we have this opposite color bishop endgame with an extra pawn for white. So it's clear that white is playing for a win here, but does he have realistic winning chances? Now, for instance, if all the pawns on the king side would come off the board, if they are exchanged, it's actually a very simple draw. You're going with your king, let's say, to b7. And if you try to create a passed pawn as white, bring up your pawns there, then everything will be exchanged. You can even give up the remaining, you can give up the bishop for the remaining pawn, and we can call it a day. But so far, many pawns are still on the board, and things are incredibly difficult here. It's a very complex endgame. I will take you through the ins and outs. King d2. And black really is trying here to exchange these pawns. Like the more pawns are coming off the board, it really helps the defender in general. So white is not going to cooperate. Played here the move g4, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes to e6 to hit the pawn on a2. Now, for instance, if you play a move like a3, it was not played in the game, black is going to play the move a5 with the idea to fix the pawn on the dark squares, and then white will no longer be able to break through as the bishop and pawn are controlling that square. Now, there is some interesting line. Let's quickly check it out. If you go b4, you're not going to take the pawn because that creates a passed pawn for white, but you do play the move a4. And this is technically pretty good move. You want to install the bishop on c4 and set up a blockade on the queen side. After king d3, to prevent it, you go bishop d5 to hit that pawn. And, well, if you go back with the king, then indeed it's bishop c4. And it looks as if black is very close achieving its goal of setting up a fortress here. So, therefore, instead of playing the move a3, white played the move b3. This is interesting because, in general, you are taught not to place pawns on the same color of the enemy's bishop. It's usually becoming a target. But if white can go for the move c4, it takes away the d5 square from that bishop. Now, for instance, if you do play bishop d5 to attack the pawn, you go king e2. And white is in fact winning because next there will follow king f2, king g3. You're attacking the pawn, but of course also the pawn on f3 is still hanging. But before taking that pawn on h3, you will insert the move c4, chase the bishop away, and then you can take the pawn on h3. And then white will be 2 pawns up with a technically winning position. Therefore, bishop d5, not a good move. King d7 is a good move played in the game. But, okay, things are very complex. I mean, still the plan of getting the king around to the king side is quite interesting. And as we have seen, placing the bishop on d5 is not a good defense. But white also got to reckon with ideas of bishop f7 and getting the bishop around to chase the pawns from behind. Anyway, king e2 was not played. White played here immediately this move c4, and now it's very important for black to determine what kind of defensive strategy he's going to apply. There are basically 2 ideas. The first one is to try to trade off pawns on the king side, which is the plan chosen by Vallejo Pons. The second plan is the one I mentioned already with bishop f7, trying to get around with the bishop and keep these pawns under fire. It will be very difficult in that case for white to make progress. But there followed the move king d6, and to be honest, at first there doesn't look to be anything wrong with the centralization of the king. However, there followed this move, king d3, activating the king. But here again, still bishop f7, bishop g6 looks like quite a good plan. Black here consistently continued with the plan he had been preparing with the move f5. And if you go for the exchange of pawns, let's say you trade off everything, you capture with check, king goes back, then you can go g4. And well, if pawns are coming off the board, things will become much easier for black. Pawn on h3 will always be defended. Keeping the pawns on the board is quite risky. It does allow the breakthrough with g3. Pawn cannot be taken because then the h pawn eventually is going to queen. So that means white will have to go back to g1, and well, then the bishop is kind of stuck. It's very difficult, quite impossible to make progress here. So taking on f5 is not really going to help. The alternative to take on g5 is also not too great. It allows pawn takes g4, and well, in any case, black is making progress, getting closer to a draw. But the key move here, found by Shevchenko, and he played it pretty fast, it's the move f4. And well, here this is quite a nice breakthrough, and definitely not impossible to find. I mean, it's very thematical pawn break. After pawn takes g4, it's f takes g5, and white has created a passed pawn. Here, the same breakthrough I've showed earlier with g3, intending to create a passed h-pawn, can be met by the move bishop f4, and that explains why the king is very unfortunately placed on d6. Here white's going to win a pawn. Therefore g3 is not possible. Black instead played here the move king e5, but here the bishop comes to f2. Guys, and this is a very important defensive technique, as the bishop is coming to g3, neutralizing black's majority, defending the pawn, and it for instance shows that if black is going to wrap up the pawn on g5 with the king, then the white king is walking in and will pick up the remaining pawns on the queen side. Even if you defend it with the bishop can't defend both pawns simultaneously. King f4, king takes a6, king f3, and the king is not able to do anything here. This is a very nice defensive construction which cannot be breached. So therefore, king f5 not a good plan. Bishop f5 was played in the game. The king goes to c3, and now the bishop goes to b1. And this is, once again, a super instructive moment and very difficult to work out in over-the-board play. But apparently, the move played here by Shevchenko throws away the win. He played here the move a3. And it's in a way very understandable, because you place your pawn on a dark square. It cannot be chased by the enemy's bishop any longer. But it turns out that you should actually start playing here the move a4. It turns out to be a very important tempo. But on the other hand, okay, there are complicated lines here. I mean, later on you want to walk in with a king, or you want to go b4, b5. But for instance, if you do play the move a5 here to fix the structure, you can go b4, and white is able to break through here. Even if you try to get back with your king, you go bishop g3, king d7, a5, and there are two outside passed pawns. And when they are not on the same diagonal, the bishop cannot stop them simultaneously. You should try to go back with the king, but then also the white king is gonna walk in, and it's in fact a technical win from here on. So a4 is actually a very good move, but from a human point of view, it's kind of understandable that you don't play it. It feels like wrong to place pawns on light squares. On the other hand, whenever you have an endgame and it's with passed pawns involved, you usually got to push them as quickly as possible. So difficult, but let's try to understand why the move a3 is actually not so good. Black played here the move king f5 to attack the pawn. King goes into d4, and now the big moment, the decisive moment in the game, as you can try to take on g5, but then the king walks in, you go b4. It's very important not to take the pawn on g5 instantly. That pawn is not running away, but priority here has to defend against the potential threat of creating a passed pawn on the queen side. And the key move was not played. Bishop a2 is actually making a draw. And the main plan here, I mean, if you go back with king c3 intending to trap the bishop can go back to b1, and white is not making progress. But the principal plan is to go b4. And if king takes g5, white goes for king c5. King f6 apparently is the only move. This is something you have to find from afar. And look at this. If you go here for king takes c6, then it is bishop takes c4. So you better start with a4. King goes back to e7, only move once again. And after king takes c6, guys, this is so difficult to find. But apparently, bishop takes c4, the most obvious move in the position, is just losing. It does allow the move b5. And after pawn takes, the pawn is just unstoppable. For instance, if you try to come back with the king, you go b6, king c8, and you cannot stop the pawn after king b8. Well, you can go bishop g3. You can also start with king b6. And on the next move, you do have bishop g3 with checkmate. Right? So that is completely winning. The pawn is out of reach. But apparently, and this is so incredibly difficult, you can start here with this move bishop to b3. And you're, at the moment, it's a 3 versus 1 on the queen side, but you're still keeping the options open which pawn to take. And it's a very, very clever decision. Because if you do play here the move a5, then it is bishop takes c4, and white is no longer able to cross the fifth rank with its b pawn. Everything is pretty well covered. If you, for instance, play king b6, then it's bishop takes c4. And now if you do create a passed pawn, the king, the black king, is back in time because the bishop keeps an eye on this pawn. King c6, king c8, b6. And here we see that very important tempo. If white were to play here, it is b7 followed by bishop g3 and mate. But black can block the pawn in time here with bishop a6 guarding the b7 square. So that's in fact the draw. Bishop a2 would have saved the game. Now instead, bishop c2 was played. But here it turns out the bishop is not so well placed. After the move b4, king takes pawn, king c5. Here you're threatening to take the pawn on c6. And the bishop, if it were on a2, it's still keeping an eye on the pawn on c4. If you go bishop a4 to defend the pawn on c6, then it's king b6. And anyway, you're taking one of these pawns. There followed bishop to b3. But here you see that the bishop basically made two moves to attack the pawn on c4. King takes c6, bishop takes c4, a4 played, bishop to b3, attacking the pawn, hoping to go a5 and then the bishop can come back. Even if you go b5 right away, it's bishop takes a4 and you are not breaking through with the pawn. But you can go king b6, that's the key idea. Bishop takes a4, king takes a6, and the b pawn cannot be stopped. The bishop went back, so that after b5 it can pin the b pawn once again. There's king a5, that's a good move. Bishop e4, this is a last trap. Don't run with the pawn here. If you do that, the bishop goes back to b7. It covers the a6 square and the king is no longer able to support the march of the b pawn. King b5, the black king goes back, king f5, king c5, intending to walk in and hit the bishop, but there's king e6. And this is a thematical drawing setup in which the white king is unable to infiltrate. Therefore, you better, instead of b6, you activate your king first. Very important lesson, guys. If you do play bishop d3 to attack this pawn, the king goes to c6. King f5, and now you go b6, b7, b8. Black can only really give the bishop for the pawn. I mean, black tried here g3. Not really sure why, but it's already pretty bad. Bishop takes, bishop e4, king c7. And after king e6, you go b7. Black is forced to give up the bishop. And this is a theoretically winning endgame. Black resigned because the bishop is controlling the corner square. That's the key. And I can just give you a simple line, is that even if you continue the game here, the white king is approaching the h-pawn, eventually will pick up the pawn on h3. And now you can just bring up your h-pawn with the support of the bishop and the king. That is just a thematical win here. The king has to leave the corner, and then the h-pawn is breaking through. That's why after this move, king takes b7, black resigned. Now, very impressive game, but does this count as evidence? Frankly speaking, I feel like both sides, they made some mistakes. Of course, there were also some very nice moves, especially by white, but also nice moves by black. But of course, this is not hard evidence. I mean, we are waiting for the organizers to make a more public statement or send their investigations to the FIDE, the governing body of the chess world. And they eventually will have to decide whether Shevchenko is proven guilty or not. For now, I just wanted to analyze because I thought it was very instructive and entertaining game. But it's definitely not hard evidence. But perhaps in combination with, I don't know, video footage, like certain time spent walking around at critical moments, perhaps that can count as proof. But, well, I'm not a legal expert. I'm just here to analyze the chess and bring you all the latest updates from the chess world. Well, hope you enjoyed this video. If you do like it, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Bye-bye.